everyone, and welcome to the Kathy Reiswitz Show. I am Kathy Reiswitz, and today I am joined by Redmond Weissenberger, or Weissenberger, depending on where you are at the time. I just got back from Germany, so I'm kind of still in that German mode. My name should be Reisenwitz, but we've anglicized our names. He is a director at the Mises Institute of Canada and has come on today to talk about one of his big new projects and some other things that he has going on. But I wanted to talk to him first about an article that made some waves either last year or the year before. And I'm sure he's really tired of talking about it, but I am the proprietor of Sex and the State, so I'm not going to have him on and not talk about it. It is a piece by Mises Canada's editor-in-chief, which advocated slut-shaming, and it drew some fire, among other reasons, because he takes a quote by George Wallace and uses it to advocate something socially regressive. He says, "Slut-shaming now, slut-shaming tomorrow, slut-shaming forever. If you're not from Alabama, you might not know that this is a take on a quote from George Wallace, the former governor of Alabama, advocating for racial segregation. And it was segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." I don't know. I might not use George Wallace to advocate a social regressive position if I'm editor-in-chief of a free market website, but Lord knows I've done things that I shouldn't have publicly to promote free markets. So, Redmond, tell me about that. Slut-shaming, yes or no?
Well, I'm for shaming in general of behaviors that people find negative, or that people would, when you take certain, I mean, if we're going to operate within a free society where we have freedom of speech and we have these sorts of, and you're going to be accepting and tolerant of other people's views, and we're not going to use things like violence to sort of, if we're not going to say, well, don't do X or else, I'll put you in jail or kill you or, use force against you in some way, when you're using words and language to essentially, sort of take a view that you think is a negative, let's say, take a behavior that you think is negative, and you're going to, what I was going to say here, sort of promote, essentially try to get people to not do it so much. You're going to use shaming, I guess, is what it would be, right? And I guess, slut shaming is, I mean, to be honest with you, personally, I don't necessarily have so much of a position on these sorts of things, right? I mean, the piece was...
Sluts don't bother you?
Well, I don't necessarily... I mean, personally, no. I mean, I don't consider myself to be a social conservative, right? In terms of things on things like prostitution, on things like these sorts of issues, I largely think that as long as it's between consenting adults, there isn't really a problem with a lot of these behaviors. When these things come into the public realm, and then when you come into, I guess, sort of ideas of common decency and morality, then once you're in that public sphere, then you have to start thinking about, okay, well, our actions that we take will be perceived by others in a certain way, and it does say certain things about you. Now, we have to be cognizant of everything we do and say, and how that will, lead other people to think about us, right? And so
sure.
I don't necessarily think. So in the same way that we should be shaming people who engage in, segregation. I mean, I'd have to, and honestly, I'd have to go back and read James's piece. Personally, after I saw it on the website, I did take it down. So that isn't the Mises Canada position on, and to be honest, I try to stay away from these types of issues on Mises Canada. So I don't know. I mean, if you want to have a conversation about specifically, the act of slut shaming, and I don't even realize, like the whole thing around the, and I guess it came out. It's funny because all of this kind of stuff came out of that. I believe it was a Canadian police officer, right? Who made some remark, and then there were all these sort of talks about, basically he said something where, if you dress in a certain way, you might expect that there's probably a higher chance that something negative might happen, I think is what he was saying, right? Something.
I think it was a little more than that. I think it was basically, what do you expect? Like, I don't need to necessarily do my job. You need to dress better, or more modestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that Stefan Molyneux, who would probably disagree, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. He made the point that if you're gonna, Walker, and if you're gonna, I don't know, it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my issue is I think reasonable people can agree that coercion exists on a continuum. And there are some bright lines we can draw. If you say, if you do X, then I will shoot you in the face, versus if you do X, I will imprison you, versus if you do X, I will ostracize you or spread rumors about you or,
Right.
make fun of you. It's all coercion. It's all using some kind of negative stimulus to try to engineer someone else's behavior.
Well,
And
but we do. I mean, we do live in a society. We live in a place where, and I had a conversation with Jeffrey Tucker about this kind of stuff, right? And I mean, the way you act does say certain things about you, right? And when you're even talking about things as normal as things like table manners. I have children, right? And to some extent, I'm trying to, I guess, have them internalize certain modes of behavior. So, like when they're at the dinner table, they're not eating with their hands. Let's
sure,
say.
but there's a difference between you saying,
Like
"Listen,
this.
you don't eat with your hands because other people are going to assume some negative things about you, like you don't have any home training,"
Yeah.
versus, and you can, to teach them that, you can spank them, but
Oh,
that is a different relationship than society teaching sluts to not be so slutty, or it should be, in my opinion. And I think that what the problem I have is people compare. Uh, it, what slut shaming does, in my opinion, is it takes a completely voluntary interaction and then
mhm.
introduces coercion into it. Whereas shaming people who are acting in a way that's not completely voluntary, I see the utility of that, and I see the moral rightness of that potentially. But introducing coercion into a completely cooperative exchange, I don't see how that's justifiable at all. And so that's where I have an issue with it. But I agree with you in that I think that shaming is obviously, shaming a completely cooperative behavior is clearly superior to introducing physical violence into that interaction. And shaming sluts is not something that should be illegal because it is speech, and you don't want to then up the ante to violence.
Mhm.
But I mean, I don't see any justification for introducing coercion into that at all.
Well, I've sort of talked to, well, again, I don't see that shaming is coercion. You know what I mean? If I say to somebody, well, I don't think your behavior is appropriate in this situation, I don't see how that's coercion, really, right? And I mean, I sort of talked to, I sort of lost my thought there, but I mean, I briefly talked to James about this kind of stuff, though I totally forgot my point.
It happens. But
Too
I'm,
much.
I'm
The thing is that, I don't see, essentially critiquing somebody's behavior that you find objectionable to be coercion in any way, shape, or form, right? I mean, if I'm if
so
I'm
when people are taking Belle Knox and harassing her and vilifying her and making life difficult for her because she engaged in completely consensual voluntary behavior,
well, some people.
ostracizing her, you don't think that that's coercive at all?
Well, is it coercive when somebody says Walmart, you should pay, you're exploiting your workers because you're paying them $7 an hour and you should be paying them 15? I mean,
It's a
there's
continuum. That's my
left.
point.
What I mean,
It's a continuum.
there's hardcore, essentially socialists and leftists who will say we should, destroy Walmart, we should seize it, nationalize it, and and we should seize it and nationalize it and pay all the workers $15 an hour. Is that considered to be capitalist free market shaming? Is that should should people not allowed to free market shame? You know what I mean? Because essentially, if we're going to look at something like filming pornography, which again, I generally, as long as it's not like people who are being sort of forced into it, or people who, let's say somebody who might be a heavy drug user who's like, I don't know, I mean, again, these continuance and that kind of stuff. But generally, again, with pornography, I don't really see a problem with it. And again, it's a consensual act. She's essentially doing a job. Some people don't think that is a positive thing for possibly herself and possibly society in general. And I would generally disagree with that. Now, people are free within our society to essentially say you should not be engaging in that. You should not be engaging in that behavior because of X, Y, and Z.
Right, but the question isn't should they be able to. We're both on the same page that they should be able to, that we should not introduce more force into the situation. The question is whether it is on net beneficial, and where and when and why is it on net beneficial to shame cooperative behavior? That's my question.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I guess whenever you want.
Probably not.
I'm not a. I mean, the thing is, I'm not. It's tough because I'm not. I don't see myself as really a moral philosopher. You know what I mean? I launch music. I launch music. So, and I like to focus mostly on economics. I mean, this is sort of the issue. I mean, economics is really a value-free science, and so we can discuss, what's going to happen when you raise the minimum wage, or what's going to happen when you put up a trade barrier, pull down a trade barrier, and these sorts of things. What's going to happen when, when the market for prostitution is restricted. I don't know if you even want to use the term prostitution, or whether you like to use the term sex worker or something like that. But we could talk about these sorts of things like, well, this is what's going to happen when the market for voluntary exchange of sex services is restricted. Now, when you come to the question of, well, should we be encouraging those types of behaviors, or should we not be encouraging those types of behaviors, and what do engaging in those behaviors do to the person's self-esteem, their position within society, relationships with other people? That comes into ethics and morals and those sorts of issues.
Right.
And for me, like a lot of that stuff, largely as long as it's voluntary, I don't have a lot of problems with it. But I think in some ways maybe the jury's still out. I mean, you could say that in Saudi Arabia, to sort of take the discussion away from our fairly liberal, our fairly liberal country where, we have these discussions about these issues, but largely, people are free to engage, in the production of pornography. People are free to engage in prostitution. People are free to engage in being Miley Cyrus, and doing her thing. People complain about it, but nobody's chopping her head off or anything like that. But when you go over to a place like Saudi Arabia, is wearing a chador within that society, is that a voluntary act? I think I find it more interesting to talk about places like that, and I find sometimes we have these discussions about what's going on here in North America or Europe, where it's fairly liberal, but we're not really tackling, I think, tougher issues like like I said, everybody the American government is complaining about what's going on in Russia with regard to gays, but okay, well, what about the 10 countries that are allied with the United States militarily and in foreign policy, but they essentially will, kill gays and stone them to death, and we don't see that sort of, and we don't really see us tackling those kinds of issues. I don't know where I was going with that, but like, it's for me, something like slut shaming is fairly like I don't especially within our society, I don't see it as being a fairly big issue. You know what I mean? Like I don't like these sorts of things. I think that there's bigger issues to deal with, and like I said, within Mises Canada, I try to stay away from this kind of stuff because I think a lot of it is sort of divisive, and I feel, I mean, sometimes like when I think you were using, I don't know if you still use that term, check your privilege, that sort of thing. I find sometimes that it's sort of I find it's adopting the rhetoric of the left. Do you know what I mean? And because if you go to YouTube and you search the term privilege, you'll oftentimes, I think the first couple of videos that come up will be actually, the Marxist International meeting of 2013, talking about quote unquote white privilege or something like that, right? And I find a lot of some of these issues I find to be just sort of buying into the concepts of the sort of collectivist left. I don't know if you know where I'm going with that, or do you see what I'm talking about?
Well, I'll put it to you differently. The fact of the matter is that within the free market community, we have very, very underdeveloped theories and scholarship on certain issues, including class conflict and what I term bigotry, which, to just kind of define it, would be discrimination on arbitrary bases. And I think that as a result, we don't have robust theories and vocabulary around those issues. So if you want to talk about those issues, the only language really available to you is from the left. And if you want scholarship on those issues, the only scholarship available to you is on the left. I think it's to our extreme, extreme detriment that we don't talk about these issues, and that we don't have scholarship on these issues, and that we don't have a vocabulary around these issues. And I believe that it's a huge part of why free market ideas have, up until this point, pretty much only appealed to people who are not particularly interested in these issues. And that if we're going to have any purchase going forward, as America and the West becomes more ethnically diverse, as women stop getting married and start economically and politically and socially rising in influence and power, if we continue to use the same focuses and the same viewpoints and the same vocabulary around these issues that it would seem matter to these other people, if we continue to be either silent on them or hostile to their concerns, we're going to continue to lose, and that's a problem for markets.
Yeah.
And it's sad, it's tragic that people would think that concerns around these issues would be necessary. Like, if you bring up the problem of bigotry, then the only solution is the state. Well, that's freaking sad, and it's not true. There are free market solutions to these issues. We have to put our minds to getting there, and as long as we're hostile to the people who are bringing the issues up, and as long as we say, well, that's a lefty term, or that's a lefty concern, then we're just going to continue losing.
Yeah, but I think the issue though there is that when you go to the root, when you go to the root of some of this stuff, this class conflict and stuff, it comes from, essentially, its root is Marxism, right?
That doesn't make any sense, though. Its root is not Marxism. What Marx did is he took a concern that a lot of people share, and he articulated on it, and he presented some solutions to it, and he developed scholarship around it, and he built a movement around it. He didn't invent class conflict. Class conflict existed, and he talked about it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, but I think it's funny, I had dinner with, I was at a dinner with Wendy McElroy, and I guess we could talk about the positive sides of Mises Canada. But anyways, with Wendy, and I mean, I do agree that, wow, we could talk about class. I mean, I think they're largely, they're abstractions that don't, I mean, it's a way of, simplifying things, right? Because essentially I'm a methodological individualist, right? You got to start from individuals. I mean, forests don't exist, right? Only trees do, but we could have another conversation on that. But I mean, I was talking to Wendy McElroy about this kind of stuff, and I was sort of saying that, essentially second wave feminism, as far as I could see it, essentially adopted, Marxist class analysis and then applied it to relations between the sexes. Is it valid? because he did that? Is it, I don't necessarily see there. In some ways, I find that they're trying to create, and oftentimes I find that Marxists in general and leftists in general try to do this. They try to create conflicts where none need exist or none actually do exist, right?
How would one even do that?
Like here in Canada, we actually do have a fairly pluralistic, multi-ethnic society. And what I often find happens is that essentially you have groups who are trying to create conflict where none exists, right? And oftentimes they're coming up and they're using a lot of this, left-wing language and whatnot, and they're coming into here and they're saying, well, we need to have this special ethnically focused, public school because of X, Y, Z. You know what I mean? And we need to have this one group get these special privileges because of this, and this one group get these special privileges because of that. And they're using, essentially, the language of Marxist class conflict to do that. And this is where I have sort of these problems. And granted, you might have an issue with somebody deciding, well, I don't. And I mean, I don't think you have a right to exist in a society where everybody's going to like you for who you are and what you do. I have no right to my reputation. Let's put it that way. You know what I mean? I don't have a right to force somebody to think that what I do is wonderful and happy and joyous and be, yeah, that's great, Redmond. I really love what you're doing. And, some people out there really hate me and probably really hate what I'm doing with Mises Canada. And that's their right to do that. You know what I mean? I don't have a right for them to, they don't have to love what I'm doing, Anyways.
I'm not really clear on how that relates. I mean, when I think about class conflict, I don't know the situation in Canada, but speaking of, there is definitely class conflict in America. And you see it in the fact that the right-wing media, and I hate to be that general, but whatever. I write for townhall.com and PJ Media and The Blaze and all that, so I'm part of the problem in that respect. But you see article after article after article about welfare and entitlement programs. Welfare is a tiny, tiny percentage of the budget. You never see, really, I mean, besides a very, very small cadre of anti-cronyist writers like Tim Carney, you don't see anything about corporate welfare. You don't see very much about the fact that we need to cut Social Security, which is, a regressive entitlement. And so, I think that class conflict, absolutely exists, and that we ignore it and we pretend it doesn't, or we participate in it at our dire peril as free marketers.
I mean, we don't participate in it. Or what you're saying is that, and I agree with you on that point about, yes, certain people will use the fact that people are different, to sort of create, certain beliefs or whatever to get people to act in certain ways. Absolutely.
So left refers to this as othering. So what the right does is it others poor people and says, these people are essentially different than you are. They don't operate on the same incentive structure. They are bad people, and that's why they're poor. They don't look at the fact that the system is structured from top to bottom to keep people poor. They other them.
Yeah, but the left does exactly that with, now they're trying to do it with white males. As far as I can see, and whites in general, you know what I mean? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's now something called the White Privilege Conference. And I'm sorry, but when you go to Japan, are the Japanese, is there Japanese privilege? When you go to Africa and they don't like.
Did Japan redline their neighborhoods to ensure that different races could not participate in the economic structure of the day?
Racial conflict exists all over the world. I mean, racism is not particular. I mean, if you want to talk about what's going on in America, yeah, for sure, you can talk about those sorts of issues. But last time I checked, racism is a human thing. It's not a white-only thing. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. So it's great that in America people are talking about the fact that we are still dealing with the heritage of things like redlining, of things like vagrancy laws, of things like the public education system, of things like the drug war. Like, that needs to be talked about. And if it's only talked about people on the left, that's a huge loss for liberty.
Yeah, but I don't think that I don't think that that race has to. And I agree with you that we need to be talking about the war on drugs, and I think that libertarians and people in the free market movement have always talked about that kind of stuff. I don't think they ever haven't. You know what I mean? I think that's. But I think some of the problem with talking about these these privilege issues, and we're talking about, well, the war on drugs is only about black versus white, and I'll be honest, I don't know that you ever made that claim, but I think there was a piece on fee when you were discussing, what was I going to say, when you were discussing it was with Julie Borowski, and
Yeah,
you were
it was
talking
a privilege debate.
Yeah, the privilege debate, and I think that you made a point, something like you're saying that 97% of marijuana arrests within Washington D.C. were black, and I don't know that had. I think you were making the implication that it had to have something to do with white privilege.
It's a privilege that white people are inoculated from these arrests, and black people aren't. That is a good, not good, but it's a privilege.
Well, yeah, except when you look at the racial makeup of the Washington D.C. police force, it's majority black, right? Like
that doesn't negate the reality of the situation.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like, is it white privilege when blacks are...
It's still white privilege, yeah. Even if blacks are perpetrating it, whites are still privileged. I mean, and I agree that it's not just a race thing, it's also very much a class thing. It's very much about the fact that redlining created these neighborhoods which are majority black, and that those neighborhoods are in poverty because they couldn't get decent mortgages, and that now it's much easier for police to harass these poor people because they don't have the tools to defend themselves. Race and class are inextricably linked, and it's not simple. Absolutely. So, but anyway, we only have 5 minutes left. This has been really interesting. I know I don't think we intended to talk about this the whole time, but I've liked it. So I wanted to give you a few minutes when as we're wrapping up to get anything across that you wanted to in this conversation, and then also to plug your projects.
Yeah, for sure, and I mean, and I agree with you. And I'll be honest, it is actually good that I'm talking about this kind of stuff, because you're right. We do, if we're going to move outside of the world that we exist within, right? And sort of, if we're not just going to be, what's that term? Circle jerking, I think.
Yeah.
Is that appropriate? Should I be shamed now for using that term?
No.
But anyways, I agree with you. I mean, because a lot of people do have these issues, and if we don't deal with them, if we don't talk about these things, I mean, we can sort of brush this stuff off and say, well, we don't need to deal with it. And I agree with you 100%. There's so many long-term structural problems. I don't want to use the term structural because I don't like it, but yes, I mean, obviously that we have the legacy of redlining that needs to be dealt with now. But is the way to deal with that granting positive rights to certain groups? I don't believe it is, and I think that that's the problem with sort of what I see as being, using the wording of the left and even really engaging with them sometimes, is that their whole deal is that they just want to grant unlimited positive rights to absolutely everybody, and then really in the end take it. And that's what gets my back up about this stuff so much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you and everybody else in the movement. Absolutely. Yeah. It's like we can't even talk about it because we don't want to be aggressed on. Well, yeah, of course we don't want to be aggressed on.
Yeah, and I think. Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think, but that's also when I see the problem when I see a place like Canada where we don't have, because Canada doesn't have that. I think some on the left wish Canada had a legacy of quote unquote slavery. I mean, no, I think they do, because they want to be able to use those same sort of tools to expand the power of the state, right? That's gone on in the United States. Whether and I see it all the time. They're trying to use the same language, even though it doesn't really work here because we don't have that same history. But yeah, anyways, I'd love to talk to you more about other stuff long term. But yeah, so anyways, I've been running Mises Canada for 4 years. Obviously, we were inspired by the Mises Institute down in Auburn, Alabama. But we're not officially, we're a completely independent organization. We're friendly with them, but we don't really do a lot with them otherwise. We try to expand the teachings of Mises and the free markets within the Canadian context and the international context. Of course, a lot of our writers are American because that's where a lot of these people come from, and so I'm always telling them to write about Canadian issues. But we have a couple of programs that I think everybody should check out. We've got Rothbard University, which is coming up just next week. And right now we're teaming with Liberty.me to essentially play Rothbard U. You can live stream it. And so I don't know. I think we're going to have a link on Mises.ca, and we'll probably have a link at Liberty.me to sort of to show what's going on. And then coming up this fall, November 8th, we've got I was going to say here, we've got the International Conference of Prices and Markets, and that is, I guess, probably one of the few Austro-friendly sort of. I mean, it's an economics conference. We've had it. This will be the third year going on. The first 2 years, it was called the Toronto Austrian Scholars Conference, and that was. We doubled our attendance year over year. We had people from around the world coming to it, and so this year coming up, we've got it. We've now renamed it to sort of match the name of our journal, and you can also check out our journal, which is the Journal of what is it called? The Journal of Prices and Markets, and you can go to pricesandmarkets.org. We've just released our next issue. And actually, I wanted to talk to you about having. I'd love it if you came up to the conference of prices or the International Conference of Prices and Markets. And I was actually going to ask you if you wanted to send Belle Knox up here. I don't know if you talked to her, but what's her actual name? I don't even. Or should I be using
Miriam Weeks?
Yeah, Mary. I don't know if I should even be using her. Is that her screen name, I guess, or something like that? I don't know how these things work.
Belle Knox is her porn name, and I hope that she uses it because it's a lot smarter for SEO for her to use her porn name if she wants to build a career that way. So.
Well, yeah, no, I'm interested.
Yeah, she actually is a Young Voices advocate now, so I'm helping to get her published and speaking gigs and interviews. So if you want to talk to her, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. Thanks again for having me on your show, Kathy. I'd been trying to talk to you, I guess, if I'd been for a couple months, and I never got around to it because I've just been so busy. But thanks for having me on, and let's continue this discussion for sure.
Absolutely. I'd love to come on still, and we can continue this conversation, and I'd like to have you on again soon. Thank you so much for coming, Redmond. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Please like, comment, share, subscribe.